Who are the biggest transfers from the 2025 summer? How can we tell if these transfers are going to work? Does the player have to adapt to a new league? Maybe it's a new style of play.
But more importantly, how well does the role that they played on their previous team translate to their new team? And how might we use a stat from the NBA to figure that out?
He's back. Welcome back to SincereFC. Today's episode is about usage rate and how we can use it to learn about players that we don't watch. This video is a continuation of a previous video about usage rate. And if you haven't watched that video, go ahead and click on the video on screen now. Watch the first 7 or 8 minutes so you understand what the statistic is about, and then come back. Now that you're back, let's begin from where we left off last time. We ended last video looking at all the attacking players from the Premier League. We learned a lot, but the issue, at least for me, is that I already knew a lot of the traits and roles of those players. Because I already know them, I'm sort of using the data to back up things that I already believe. Today, we're going to look at the other top 5 leagues that I don't watch as closely. For each of them, I'm going to highlight some of the players you may have heard a lot about, but haven't had a chance to watch yet. For the players who made big money moves this past summer, we're going to try and understand what the team that bought them was thinking, and whether or not that strategy is going to work out. And finally, I'll point out a few players in each league that I think we could be hearing more about in the future based on where they are in this visualization. I have 2 quick notes before we start. First of all, I don't mean to say that this is the best way to compare players to each other. This is not a graph showing good player, bad player. This is to understand roles and hierarchies within teams and fits when players change clubs. It's for scouting. It's for how players fit within a group. Second, many of you in the comments have suggested that we use things like expected threat, XOVA, and expected assists. So, at the midpoint of the season, we will look at XA in addition to players' actions and usage rates. I still don't know where to find expected threat and expected OVA for every player over the course of the season. If you have a source for that, please leave it in the comments below. Now let's get into the video. One thing I wanted after last video was to provide some more context. I'm going to show you some players from the past that we all know very well. Note that this data wasn't publicly available prior to the 17-18 season, so we'll be looking at players from since then. Let's see a player who dominated the Premier League. Here's 2018's Eden Hazard. But be careful though. Chelsea fans would tell you that even though he was lighting it up this season, everything was going through him. That's not necessarily what you want. Here's an example of a central midfielder. This is Paul Pogba from that same season. Now what about a striker? Here's Cristiano Ronaldo from the year he rejoined Manchester United in 2021. What about a player who didn't do so well? Here's Mykhailo Mudryk from 2023 under Mauricio Pochettino. Now let's see some players from outside the Premier League. Here's Lionel Messi. We'll come back to him later. Let's look at his teammate from that season, Philippe Coutinho. Here's Coutinho at Barcelona in 2018-19. And here's other Coutinho at Liverpool just one season before. What explains this change? Sure, he didn't use the ball as much. His usage went down about 27%. But his creativity went down 45%, his shots went down 33%, and his actual end product went down 70%. It's commonly accepted in several sports that with higher volume, it's hard to maintain your rate stats. In the NBA, when you shoot more three-pointers, you likely are going to shoot a lower percentage. But this is the opposite. Coutinho's usage went down, but his actual end product metrics went down even more. This is an example of why a player's role is so important. Sure, these teams don't play the same styles, but the position Coutinho occupied was quite similar. It was a mix of the left wing and the number 10 position. But look at Coutinho's usage numbers at Liverpool. 27 is a best player in the league, I'm the guy type of number. And the problem is, when he gets to Barcelona, the guy is already there. So naturally, Coutinho has to scale back his usage. But it seems to me like he was just unable to adapt to playing that lesser role. Barcelona needed somebody who could play more direct and less like a playmaker on that left side. When Coutinho went to FC Bayern, he experienced a lot of the same issues. That's because he didn't immediately come in and become the best guy on the team. But you know where he finally did find his form again? At Aston Villa. And who had Aston Villa just lost the season before? That's right, Jack Grealish, an extremely heliocentric player whose manager told him to go out and do whatever you want. That's the exact position Coutinho knows how to play. Of course, there are things going on off the pitch that we can't see, and tactical instructions from the manager that we'll never understand. But for players like Coutinho, that role is an equally important thing.
This same logic applies in basketball. If you take a ball-dominant star player from another team and ask them to be the third option for your team, they might take a while to figure out that role, if they ever figure it out at all. Remember the difference between Russell Westbrook on the Wizards and Russell Westbrook on the Lakers.
Speaking of roles, what about a striker who moved? Here's Gonzalo Higuain at Chelsea, and then Gonzalo Higuain at Juventus the season before. In terms of ball dominance and creativity, he was basically the same. The only difference is that he couldn't score. But this gives us some interesting context to look at transfers with later. For strikers like Higuain, perhaps his place on the graph is so similar because he's playing the same role in each team, whereas with Coutinho, he has to contend with the existing hierarchy of the other forward attacking players. So let's look at the other top 5 leagues. Up first, La Liga. First, I'll talk about some players that we've all heard about before. Here are the attacking midfielders. Although he no longer plays on one of the elite teams, Isco is still a world-class player. Luka Modric appears to be getting the most bang for his buck. You'll notice throughout this video that a lot of the savvy veteran players are far above this line. Here are the wide players. Antony made a serious comeback after he moved to Real Betis in January. This is scaled for teams' amount of possession, but once you scale, Rafinha is not a very ball-dominant player. But he is a goal scorer, and he's also above this line. We'll see a lot of other goal-scoring wingers slightly or far below the line in this video. So that suggests to me that he really does it all. Earlier when I spoke about Coutinho, I mentioned that Barcelona needed a winger who could be effective without always having the ball. Ironically, I think they have that player right now. And I don't watch so much Madrid, but Rodrigo is surprisingly far to the left. He's above the line, so that's good. But why so little usage? Let me know in the comments. I guess he's the one in Madrid's hierarchy who doesn't really get on the ball. It's not that he doesn't want it, but that's the role he's playing. Now here are the strikers. To the right, you can see a player you may have heard about before. This is Alexander Sorloth. I've been wondering why he never got links to a Premier League club. Perhaps this wastefulness is part of the reason why. Somebody should show him this chart and his position in relation to players like Robert Lewandowski and say, play like that. Let's look at 3 transfers from La Liga this year and think about whether it makes sense for each one's new team. First is Alex Baena from Villarreal to Atletico Madrid. Besides Dani Raba on Leganés, no player had as large of a role in their team as Baena did at Villarreal. That worried me at first, but once I looked closer at Atletico's work this summer, I realized that they had a massive clear-out of the creative players. Baena is likely going to have the opportunity to take a major role in their attack, especially with Antoine Griezmann in his age 34 season, getting ready to take a step back. Next is Everton's signing of Villarreal's Tierno Barry. He shows up quite similar to Fabio Silva on this chart. If he's anything like Fabio Silva in the Premier League, I'm not that excited. He's got a very similar position to Beto, so I guess Everton have basically signed him as a backup. So on that front, it's okay. But it doesn't seem like Barry will elevate them or give them a new look up front. So I'm not sold on this one. Nobody particularly big transferred out of La Liga this summer, but a player who left and is probably going to come back is Antony. Betis do not currently have any heliocentric wingers that will do the job that he did for them in the second half of the season. Isco just went down with an injury, which opens up the roles even more. Finally, who are some young players that I like from this league? This isn't the most creative pick, but I like the look of Arda Güler. The fact that he's so close to Luka Modric on this chart is very promising for him as a playmaker midfielder. Somebody else who's very interesting to me on this list is the hybrid forward known as Cristantis Uche on Getafe. He used to play as a defensive midfielder, switched positions last year, ended up with 10 goals and assists as a 6'3" hybrid midfielder forward. Kind of an odd build, but if he can move closer to that efficiency line, he looks like a fascinating prospect in terms of the physical and the technical. And I just discovered Wolves have made an offer. Up next is the Bundesliga. Here are all the strikers. The only striker above the line is Harry Kane. This matches what I feel like I've seen from Kane. He's known for his link-up play. Those 3 below Kane, they score a lot of goals, but they're also the type of player that the attack ends with, and they're all 26, 27. The elite teams probably don't want to sign them. Near the bottom is Benjamin Sesko. He looks like one of the more wasteful forwards in the league. I know that Red Bull Leipzig is a high-tempo counter team, but this kind of thing matters if you're about to switch tactics a lot. Sesko just transferred to a team who want to maintain possession. And this Victor Boniface, he uses a lot of the ball. Here are all the wide players. Bayern Munich just swapped Leroy Sané for Luis Diaz, who's over here. You can see why. Frankfurt really know how to recruit. This guy Chaibi and this guy Knauf are both very promising. They have 2 other young players I couldn't even plot because they didn't have enough minutes last year. Now here are the attacking midfielders.
Florian Wirtz was a very heliocentric player last year. He's in a pack with several of those. And now here are the hybrid forwards. I like several players in this group, but Lois Openda is not one of them. Again, his wastefulness might explain the lack of solid links to bigger teams. Now for some of the players who transferred. Hugo Ekitike moved from Frankfurt to Liverpool. Liverpool didn't play with an endpoint striker before. Liverpool needed somebody who was going to be part of the attack just as much as all of the players they had who filled in at striker last year, like Gakpo, Nunez, Diaz, or Salah. On Monday Night Football last week, they said that Ekitike was the most similar player to Isak in all of Europe. I think I agree. He's the best mix of creativity and goal scoring from a striker right now. In contrast, I don't know if I understand Florian Wirtz to Liverpool as much. The heliocentric nature of his role at Leverkusen makes this feel like a mismatch. Liverpool don't play like that. All of their central midfielders sit further to the left, and they already have the guy in Mohamed Salah. Perhaps this is more of a play for a year or two down the line. And even though Omar Marmoush has spent more than a half year at Manchester City, it looks like they still need to figure out their hierarchy. Now that Kevin De Bruyne has left, the most heliocentric player left is Marmoush. But Manchester City already have two pretty ball-dominant wingers, and they also brought in Ryan Cherki, who's a heliocentric number 10. Somebody needs to be on the end of City's attacks. It can't always be Erling Haaland. Who are some young players I like from this league? Heidenheim's number 10, Leo Scienza, is an interesting player. A season ago, he was playing in the third division of the Bundesliga and dominating, with his team winning the league running away. His first season in the Bundesliga was also a success. At just 23, I feel like he needs a look. I also like Myron Boadu. Him being in this spot on a subpar team and being one of their main goal scorers is a good sign, especially given a lot of the other players from small teams in his kind of role are much below the line. Boadu moved to PSV this summer to take the role as the main striker. With another good season under his belt, I have a feeling we'll see him back in the top 5 leagues in no time. Finally, I like the look of Maximilian Bayer. He's both good in front of goal and efficient with the ball, all while being one of the lesser ball-dominant players for Dortmund. The fact that he has the ability to thrive in that role makes me think he'll be a useful player for many years to come. Now let's move to Italy. Here are the wide players. Most of the names you know are above the line, with one exception, Riccardo Orsolini. I've always wondered why he hasn't made a move to a bigger team in Italy, and it may be because he's a sink for the ball, far more so than other wide players. Yes, Orsolini puts up good counting stats, but he's draining Bologna's possessions to do it. I think my impression of Rafael Leao is that he just looks good. He's not really playing at an outstanding level. Samuel Chukwueze is a bit more creative. Christian Pulisic is better at getting goals and assists. And if that's the conversation we're having about you, you're not close to elite yet. Now here are the strikers. This league has the most strikers above the line. This matches what I feel like I see when I watch the Serie A. The strikers get involved in the build-up with their link-up play. I used Alvaro Morata as the example in my video about hold-up play as a stat, and he's one of the less creative forwards in the league. Here are the attacking midfielders. Paulo Dybala is the most heliocentric among the midfield players. You can also see a lot of classy veteran midfielders above the line here. And this chart reveals something interesting about Napoli's tactics. Two of their main midfielders, Scott McTominay and Andre Zambo-Anguissa, are actually below the line, but they don't use the ball very much. This is an example of a tactic you may have heard about, where the central midfielders are the ones at the end of the attacks. McTominay and Zambo-Anguissa scored many of the Napoli's most important goals on their route to the Serie A title last season. Fascinating. Here are the hybrid forwards. Ademola Lookman is the most heliocentric player in Serie A. In terms of attacking output, he's probably also the best right now. Here are 3 transfers I looked at from this season. Tijani Reinders moved from Milan to Manchester City, and I think I get this one. Manchester City had several playmaker midfielders in De Bruyne, Gundogan, and Bernardo Silva. With De Bruyne and Gundogan both leaving, they're going to use Bernardo as more of a playmaker. In Reinders, they have a midfielder who's still efficient with the ball, but doesn't need to use it a lot to be successful. So despite the hierarchy issues that I mentioned before, Reinders can fit into their squad without causing more problems in that regard. Milan are replacing him with Luka Modric. Modric isn't as dynamic, but I think Milan have guys for that job, like Ruben Loftus-Cheek. When you look at Milan's team, nobody was terribly effective as a playmaker, and if you look at where Modric is, he could be exactly what they need to unlock some of their attacking players. Dan Ndoye moved from Bologna to Nottingham Forest. Forest play with a number 10 and Morgan Gibbs-White. The main player they lost this year is Anthony Elanga, who's direct rather than trying to be a playmaker from out wide. Ndoye fits that mold, being successful without needing to use too much of the ball. But Callum Hudson-Odoi actually uses the ball very little. And given that Ndoi won't have a teammate like Orsolini who dominates the ball, we could see Dan Ndoi taking on a bigger role in the team and being a really good player. One move I wasn't sure about was Giacomo Raspadori to Atletico Madrid. I mentioned previously that Atletico had a big clear out. They brought in some heliocentric players to be creators like Alex Baena, and Raspadori doesn't use too much of the ball, and he has a good eye for goal. The unique thing I'm worried about with this transfer is that Raspadori will be competing for playing time with his manager's son, who plays in the same position in almost the same way. I wouldn't want that to be me. As far as young players I like from this league, I found two that stuck out, the first being Yacine Adli for Fiorentina. Of the younger midfielders in Serie A, he's one of the highest players with respect to the line, and he had a solid number of goals and assists. I also like the look of Nico Paz for a lot of the same reasons. Nico Paz is actually in talks with Tottenham right now. Finally, let's talk about Ligue. Here are the attacking midfielders. Ryan Cherki was the second most ball-dominant midfielder, next to this guy Del Castillo, who I hadn't heard of. But put some respect on his name. You remember Brest qualified for the Champions League last year? Del Castillo's been with them the whole time as the main creative linchpin as they rose up the league. All of PSG's midfielders are incredibly efficient. To me, that's the sign of a top team. Thiago Almada also looks very good here. Besides the PSG players, he was the most efficient in the league. Here are the wide players. Having not watched PSG every week, Bradley Barcola doesn't use the ball or create as much as I would have imagined. He's in the middle between being a creator and being a goal scorer. He's no doubt a good footballer. He went cold in the second half of last season, but if he can keep up his goal-scoring form from the first half, he'll be a big threat. Meanwhile, Ousmane Dembele is, to me, the best all-around attacker in the world. The combination of creating and scoring at that level, nobody else is matching it. Here are the strikers. Virtually all of these players are endpoint strikers. Only Jonathan David stands out above the line, although Mika Bierith and Miko Tadze both look good, just maybe not for possession teams. League 1 is also the league with by far the fewest number of strikers above this 15 line. Here are the hybrid forwards. Almost all these players are below the line. These players are tasked with scoring goals for their teams, and none are particularly efficient or particularly good at scoring. The two best in this group were Mason Greenwood and Evan Gesson. We know that Mason Greenwood won't move, but Evan Gesson just moved to Aston Villa. Now for some transfers. Jonathan David moved from Lille to Juventus. Across the charts, Juventus don't really have standout players. Their wingers are the best players in terms of creativity and goals, and even they are not so impressive. So a lot will be riding on David's back. I think he's by far their best player now. And they would be smart to let him take the striker role, but they already have Dusan Vlahovic. So I'm confused about whether they're going to let David play the correct role. Thiago Almada is moving from Lyon to Atletico. With Antoine Griezmann stepping back and Rodrigo de Paul moving to the MLS, Atletico need a main creator in a midfield role. Almada was one of the most efficient players in all of Europe. He's young and not overly ball dominant, which bodes well for Atletico, who don't always keep possession. The striker Emmanuel Emega was getting reports about links to Chelsea earlier in the summer, and he didn't move. Here's why I think that was the right call. I saw in my other data sets that Emega scored many important goals for Strasbourg. But to play in a team like Chelsea's, you probably either need to score more or get much more involved in their team's attack. Emega is basically an endpoint striker, as we can see. And Chelsea just bought Joao Pedro. He's basically the opposite style. He's super involved in the play. Who are some young players I like from this league? Akliouche, Bouanani, and Sahraoui are all young and on smaller teams. We've seen players like this fail in the past, but we've also seen them light up the world. The fact that they're all efficient while also being primarily skillful players, to me, bodes very well. And this Davitashvili got relegated last season with Saint-Etienne. He looks like a steal for somebody. Someone that I think may come up in the news in future is Delane Bakwa. He's only 22, physically imposing, and he had a good season for Strasbourg last year. Nottingham Forest just had a £30 million bid for him rejected 2 days ago, so we're definitely on the right track. Finally, I know we've seen this data for the Prem, but I wanted to cover two recent Premier League transfers, as this data helped me understand them a lot. First, Xavi Simons to Tottenham. They need a main attacking midfielder with James Maddison out. If you see Eze on the chart, that makes the most sense. But if you can't get him, you want somebody like that. Simons is heliocentric. Tottenham need that. They have nobody to take the reins without Maddison. And even with him, he's not always fit. But Tottenham were also linked with Como's Nico Paz. They're both heliocentric, they're both creators, but Simons puts more of an emphasis on the goal scoring, and Paz puts more of an emphasis on the passing. I think Tottenham have got passers. What they need are risk takers. People used to being selfish, especially with Dominic Solanke also out. The one question is whether he can control the Premier League game's tempo. but I think Spurs have midfielders for that task in Bentancur and Bissouma. Siemens is used to fast play with Leipzig, so with all of Spurs' squad healthy, he could even double as more of a line-breaking forward. Nick Woltemade and Yohan Wissa just moved to Newcastle. Once Newcastle saw the writing on the wall, they tried to get Hugo Ekitike, who, as I said, is super similar to Alexander Isak. And although he's taller and a bit slower, Nick Woltemade was actually the most creative, involved striker in the top 5 leagues last year. So from the perspective of a forward that brings their teammates into play, like Isak did, I like that. What's interesting is that they gave themselves another flavor in Yohan Wissa. Wissa's really an endpoint striker. He's arriving at the goal-scoring position. Newcastle didn't actually have that last year. Whereas these other forwards want to use the ball, Wissa's the opposite. And so these players could potentially play together, like a small guy, tall guy pairing. For Newcastle, I think Wissa's much more effective than sticking someone like Anthony Gordon at striker, who wants to use the ball as part of his game.
Let's bring all 5 leagues together. Of all the center attacking midfielders, this Leo Scienza is by far the most heliocentric person across the whole of Europe. Apart from that, Isco creates the most for his teammates, and Marco Asensio is the most efficient, meaning he's the highest to the left. Among the forward-striker hybrid players, the most ball-dominant players are Ademola Lookman, Omar Marmoush, and Matheus Cunha. Daniel Malen is actually the most wasteful among these players. The striker who's most efficient with his creativity is Marcus Thuram, who just barely beat out Harry Kane. The one who actually uses the ball most is Sebastiano Esposito, but the one who's the most wasteful was Sebastian Haller in his half season with Leganés. That's even worse than Paul Anuachu from the previous video. For the wide players, we see a few players who play on teams that don't dominate possession as the most creative once you adjust for how little they have the ball. But the most efficient was Arsenal's Bukayo Saka, and I'm really excited to see more from Alex Baena. But the reveal I wanted to do the most comes from the unscaled data, where we just see the raw number of possession-ending actions. Who is the most ball-dominant player across all 5 leagues? I think you know the answer. Whose name have we not said this whole video? If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe. Leave a comment below with more topics that you want to see covered, and I hope to see you again on Sincere FC very soon.